Hello, dear listener, and welcome to another Odd Job pod. Now, you may think this is going to be a bit of a repeat, and it may well be, because, yes, there is no elevator where we are going. We are going into No Time to Die, which, as regular listeners of this podcast will note, that we did relatively recently, because it is a relatively recent film. But as we've been going through all the Bonds, we felt that it was only fair to come back and look at a film and see if we reassessed it at all after a couple of years of Bond and a couple of years of not very much happening in James Bond. So obviously we have a podcast and we have to fill things because that's what people do on the internet. So we're going to go back in and round off our look at all the Bonds and really kind of discuss how we feel about it now and where we feel it's going to go. And to do this, as ever, I am joined by Graham Sibley. Hello, Graham.
Hello, Gary.
And Terry DeFellin. Hello, Terry.
Hello, Gary.
Hello. I just want to confirm, Terry, you've recovered from your nasty injury sustained just as we were about to go on air.
I'm feeling a little bit faint, but I've just had this odd. I was opening a bottle of beer and I got this scratch on my hand. I now feel as though I need to be careful who I go near and whom I touch.
Is Mrs. Terry going to be okay, really, or do we need to send over a SWAT team?
Possibly, or we might just have to call in the Royal Navy and just bomb my house.
Okay,
yeah, because
fair enough.
Terry, you never usually worry about who you go near or who you touch, do you?
Well, much like the James Bond franchise, Graham, I have changed. Much higher production values, but the tone has shifted markedly, it's got to be said. I don't find things as funny as I used to be perfectly honest with you. And the jokes I do tell are actually not as good as I think they are.
We did say as we were coming into this, we wondered how much we'd be talking about the film and how much we'd be wandering off into other things, and I think there's your answer. So let's get back onto the film. No Time to Die. It is a fairly... it was shocking at the time. It still is a slightly shocking denouement to the Craig era. So first of all, I'll just go in terms of, relatively recent film, relatively recent in the cinema. We know how we all go. We all come out of the cinema and go, that was the best Bond film ever, unless it was Die Another Day. And even then, I should have known better. But then you look back, you do a bit of rewatching, you do a bit of reassessment. So, Terry, how do you feel about the film now?
I still like the film. I still think it's a good film. It's just the fourth time I've seen it, and I get something different out of it each time I watch it. Normally, when I watch a James Bond film, I go, "Yeah, that's the same James Bond film that I watched, 2 weeks ago." When I watched Spy Who Loved Me, or Moonraker, or Goldfinger, or Thunderball, or almost any James Bond film pre Daniel Craig. I watched that film and I come out the end of it thinking this is the same film that I watched, 2 weeks ago, whatever it was. And I don't have that with Die Another Day. I tend to get something different from it a little bit every time I watch it. And I don't know whether that's a good thing or not. But I think it's difficult to argue with the quality of this film. But I do understand. I think I can understand why people would argue with the authenticity of the film as a James Bond film. Although I just think the film lacks a bit of humour. Tonally, it's very dark. It's understandable given how the film ends. But it takes the writers make choices about the character that sometimes I watch it and I like, and sometimes I watch it and I don't like. And interestingly, I think the most recent time I watched it, which was this morning, I sort of left thinking, I feel a bit down on this film, even though it's difficult to argue with the quality of it. I'm hoping that in the next hour or so, you guys will be able to help me examine that. And I will listen intently on your opinions as well.
It's an interesting. It's a film, and I never thought I'd say this about Bond, but it probably very much depends on the time of day and the type of mood that you are in when you watch this. And And yeah, Graham, I'm not sure how you feel about it, but I think it's probably uncontroversial to say that this is not a 10 p.m. post-pub ITV4 standard Bond fare.
No, it's not your typical ITV4 Bond film, which I think is what Terry was alluding to there. I think, as far as you can see why people might criticise it because of that. And yeah, if you just want a nice popcorn film, there is one in there. I'm sure there is. There's probably an airline cut of No Time to Die that is pretty much like that. But yeah, I actually, not only did I watch the film, I watched the film on Thursday, but I also re-listened to our podcast from 2.5 years ago. That's how much. Yeah, that's me. And of course, you know, I've been podcasting long enough to know that my opinions change pretty readily. Largely during a conversation, they can change quite markedly. But I don't think my opinions have changed that much. I did say, actually, in there about 8 minutes in, I said I did say predict that we would be recording this episode in 2 years' time. It's about 2.5 years' time, and whether or not my opinions of it would change. And back then, my opinion of the film was up there with Casino Royale, and I did say I'll come back to me in 2 years' time, and I'll probably say Casino Royale is probably the better film. And I would say yes, that is, as far as Bond films concerned, yeah. If you put two in front of me, I will say, yeah, I'll watch that one, even though I've seen Casino Royale a hell of a lot. I have seen No Time to Die quite a lot. It's interesting what you say, though, Terry, about seeing things you hadn't seen before, because this hadn't happened when we recorded it the first time. But I re-saw the film with my wife and our friend Donna. And Donna loves this film. She's seen it lots and lots and lots of times. I think it's probably her favourite one. Or maybe Skyfall. But there was a scene in there that none of us had remembered. We saw this in 3D. This was the first time we'd seen it in 3D. And the Matera scene where the car's spinning around and everything, and it's shooting out the machine guns, got the Gatlings going out. And then there's bullet casings flying out of the vent on the side as they're driving through the streets. So like there's actually the brass cases just shooting out there. And we'd only noticed that in seeing it in 3D. And we thought, they must have put that in. They must have put that in. And when we got home, we actually put our DVD copy of it on. And we thought, right, okay, well, no. It's not going to be in our copy here because we're massive nerds for this type of thing. And there it was. And we just hadn't seen it. And we'd only seen it because it was there in 3D. That's the only thing I think I've seen on multiple viewings that I hadn't seen before. That's probably not what you were thinking about, though, was it, Terry? When you were saying this sort of thing, were you?
No. I was going to say that there is a level of, I'm not Terry, but there is a level of detail in this film that I think goes into let's be fair, Terry. It's a rich film if you like that kind in terms of detail and being able to look into it. There is a lot that you can get out of it, whether you enjoy it or not, in terms of multiple viewings, which I don't think you can always say for Bonds.
It's a magnificent piece of work. It's beautifully shot. It's beautifully directed. Some of the camera angles and the composition and the scene composition is amazing. Its use of canon is amazing. Hans Zimmer utilization, its callback to the On Her Majesty's Secret Service, it tying it to On Her Majesty's Secret Service, links it to the Bond universe. It's got a nice long narrative arc. It's irritating that it's 2 hours and 45 minutes long, but it's not. I couldn't name a scene that I would want cut or removed from that movie. It's a really, really good film. It's brilliantly acted by the actors. It's sad. It's joyous in places. It's tragic. It's got a fantastic, deep, dramatic arc and real character development. And this is one of the reasons why it's such an unfamiliar James Bond film, because we're just not used to that with James Bond. He's just such a flat guy. He just starts, he starts and finishes pretty much the end, all the way through these movies. You get different reasons for enjoying James Bond films. And I think that's possibly why sometimes when I watch them No Time to Die, I'm possibly just not in the mood for that kind of growth. I like sometimes just to watch, James Bond just like shooting stuff up and having fun and doing stuff. And this movie also, I think almost all the Craig films have been an examination of the James Bond character and an examination of the James Bond universe, and at times more broadly an examination of Britain and the concept, the idea of Britain's brand and its place in the universe. And sometimes I think that's great, but sometimes it just plain irritates me because I just want to watch a James Bond film. And one of the reasons why I don't think we have any more James Bond films since then is because I just don't think they know what to do, because I think they're just too frightened to just make another James Bond film, because they're just worried about what it would look like. They don't know where to take that universe because they've trashed it. So, so interestingly, while I really like this film, it's a really good film, I'm going into this podcast with a degree of negative energy, which I'm not trying to rewrite or redo, because I think it might be a nice little dynamic to bring in to this podcast and this podcast discussion. Because I'm a lot right now. I'm a bit cross with No Time to Die. I love it, but I'm a bit cross with it.
I can see where you're coming from. And yes, whoever picks up Bond will have a hell of a job in there. To pick up a little bit on what Terry said, Graham, my innate kind of feeling when I watched No Time to Die in advance of this podcast was, this is one of the few, if not the only Bond film I can think of that if you took it out of Bond and just made it as a standalone film and didn't say who Bond was, with a few potential, you'd have to do a little bit because there's some continuity, but you could show this film to somebody, not tell them it was a James Bond film, or if somebody didn't know anything about James Bond, it would work. And I think there's very few films I can think of in the Bond franchise where you could slap something else on top of it. Maybe License to Kill, because they were going very 80s in that point, and you could probably have made that into a standard 80s action flick without Bond necessarily needing to be in there. But yeah, even with all the Bond motifs, you've got the Scooby Gang together, you've got, throwbacks to other films. I'm pretty sure you could show this one to somebody and they would not necessarily know they were watching a Bond film, even with all the callbacks that keep coming into it.
Well, Gary, all I can really say is it sounds like you've reached the bargaining stage, whereas Terry's reached the anger stage. You're right. You're both on journeys. I mean, the 5 stages they don't come in a set order. You can come and they can come and go whenever you want. But I feel you're on your journey, and hopefully this journey will progress. Do I think? Yeah. Of course, it stands alone. It stands alone as a film. But I think the trouble is, and I think we've noticed this as we've been doing the action movie landfill as well, that just because Bond is Bond, that does make a shorthand for lots of things. But how many other films have borrowed from that shorthand as well? That as soon as you get someone in a tuxedo, then all of a sudden that shorthand just comes straight in, and you immediately think of what Bond has done. So I think Bond is so lost in the action movie, because it's defined action movie landscape, that of course it's very difficult to take it away out of there. But really, I mean, if you make a film, it's like when they made Casino Royale, and everyone thought, oh, this is a bit too different. It's not. It's just evolved a bit more. It wasn't Pierce Brosnan. It was. Was it any more different from the last Brosnan film than Living Daylights was to A View to a Kill? Was it really? I don't. It probably was, but it had to move with the times. It has to survive, and it does so really, really well. It's Bond-like in its ways of surviving. I think this film is, for me, where am I? Am I at the acceptance stage? Probably not. I think I'm maybe in the fear stage. I don't know. I don't want to face that. Maybe I'm just in denial. Maybe this whole thing is denial. Yeah. What was the question again?
Welcome to the Odd Job Pod group therapy session. It's interesting. I don't know if either of you had read this from director Corey Joy Fukunyanga. I think I've got that right. But he apparently pitched the idea first off that the first the first 2/3 of the film could be taking part in James Bond's head after Blofeld had tried to wipe his memory in Spectre. And that was his first initial pitch for the film, that everything that had happened post the torture scene where Blofeld tries to wipe Bond's memory with the needle. Everything that happens after that is all in Bond's head, and it's only in the final third that you then go back to Spectre, which, aside from the fact that would make Spectre probably a better film for it. To quote another film, Terry, that's a bold play, Cotton. Let's see how that pans out for him.
Yeah, I mean, it's like that guy who came with that tweet that Die Another Day is just like actually the second half of Die Another Day is actually James Bond in a North Korean prison, but he's having a scorpion poison, a trip basically. Which is a fantastic idea.
That was
for
me.
Story. Was that you? I thought it was a tweet. I thought you said it was a tweet that you saw, or was it one of your tweets?
No, I think I think that was just me. I think.
Anyway, so it was Graham's idea, and it was a brilliant idea. But the idea, I like that idea very much. I mean, I'm not suggesting that what they have done with this movie is a bad idea. Everything Graham said is absolutely right. It doesn't necessarily change how I feel about it, but he's absolutely right what he says, because a few months from now, I'm going to watch the film and I'm going to love it. So, I mean, it's all completely a state of mind. And I think what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get my head around. There's a lot of criticism of this film. A lot of Bond fans don't like this film. And yet, I think taking away the choices that were made as to what to do with the characters in this movie, this is a proper, authentic James Bond film. Tonally, it's absolutely right. It feels like a James Bond film. It's not like, I mean, you look at it, say, like Graham mentions License to Kill. License to Kill is also, in many ways, a wonderful James Bond film, but it makes a concerted effort to look and feel different to its previous film. This is not what happens. No, this is a signature James Bond film. Sometimes I think, obviously, it's difficult for us because we've seen these films so many times that we can recognise a James Bond film, but just by looking at a few seconds of it. But I think that most mortals and civilian James Bond fans would know a James Bond film that they were watching a James Bond film after a couple of minutes, because it's just they just know, and this falls into that category. So I'm not here to criticise this film at all, but I am sort of well, I suppose I am really, aren't I? But I'm disappointed and cross with the choices that they've made at this moment. And I think it's sort of, they've not because they killed James Bond. That's fine. The man was a murderous assassin. He doesn't deserve happiness. It's like, and he went out with dignity and with nobility and making the ultimate sacrifice. That's absolutely fine. But what this is, I think, the broader narrative is to basically just trash the James Bond universe, which I am a little bit more cross about.
So this is actually, you've come on to a point which has been playing around my head, and I'm pretty sure I raised it in the last podcast, but it's one that I keep coming back to time and time again, Graham, which is very much that this, to me, feels like so we know Bond is borrows liberally from what else is going around at the time. And one of the biggest influence in cinema arguably has been the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and that comes in from comic books as well. Now, what you've got unusually with No Time to Die and the Craig era, and I don't necessarily buy into the theory that this was planned, but because they rebooted Casino Royale in the way that they did, in terms of you're starting off with Bond in his really one of his first assignments, it means that you've almost got a self-contained storybook arc, which is something that comic books do really, really well. You think of Batman being one of the kind of prime examples that you can get different writers come in. They will take that comic book franchise, in a very different direction. They'll produce a set run of their own universe, some of which becomes canon, some of which, just exists in its own area. Same with what Marvel have done with their cinematic universe. You've got what's happened in the comics. They borrow from that, but equally there's endpoints in there. And it feels to me that whilst this, I don't know whether I'm necessarily to say, that's graphic. It could be an excellent graphic novel, actually. But you're there in a self-contained. The Craig era just now is a self-contained universe of a story of Bond. Whereas if you're going to pick up the next one, you could pick it up after Die Another Day, but that would be a logical place to just basically ignore everything that's gone from Craig and go back to everything else, because it's been set up to be in a way that's very self-contained. And that to me feels like it's borrowing from comics rather than cinema in that regard. I say comics, graphic novels. I have a big love for in case any graphic novel stands now come after me. I have quite a lot of graphic novels on there, but I'm using this as shorthand for the hoi polloi who may not have gotten to that level of detail.
Gary, you're fine saying comics here. You're among friends.
Yeah, you're among friends here. Yeah.
Good. Just checking.
Yeah, this is something that we did actually discuss quite a lot on the last podcast, about this sort of containerization and the whole thing of multiverses and the whole idea of multiverses and taking characters and telling your own story with them, which is great. Now, apparently, I don't know if this is an idea that has been formulated over the last few years, but apparently when Barbara Broccoli hired Daniel Craig to do this 5-film thing, he said 5 films, and his agreement was that they would kill him off at the end of it, and it would be like go from start to finish. There would be an arc there. Now we know that realistically, the arc that they made for him was hacked about a bit because Spectre became available and they put that in. There was no way that the 4th film was going to be called Spectre when they started with the whole idea of quantum and all that sort of stuff there. But it worked out. The whole thing of Mr. White, the way that he was weaved into the whole story, and it came out really well. And they kept with Purvis and Wade all the way through, did really well. Purvis and Wade, obviously big Ian Fleming stands, obviously bring all that strength in there as well. And I think you're right. I think it is great that they managed to get that whole a whole story arc there. They managed to give him basically 5 films of being Bond, and it doesn't matter what the fact that Roger Moore sucks Scaramanga's bullet out of the stomach of out of the belly button of a dancer, and just so that he could track him down. That doesn't matter that happened. It doesn't matter that Pierce Brosnan's car was invisible, or that Blofeld managed to get away in drag. All of this stuff is irrelevant, really, in this. And it's fine. It's fine. I mean, if you are really desperate that everything that's happened in a James Bond film has to follow some kind of timeline, all has to make sense, then, well, that's your own problem. It really
that's not how it is, though, is it? I think most Bond fans understand that up until Casino Royale, Bond was an anthology series.
Well,
and there was a little bit of continuity, but to all intents and purposes, it was an anthology series. Yeah, I mean,
I think so. I think so. But
I think so too.
Yeah, but I think most people would just look at a Bond film as it stands, as what it is.
Totally.
But then there are some people that anyone who gets angry about a film not being a Bond film, I think, is probably more angry about the fact that this isn't what I've not checked off everything off my Bond film list, which is I don't know, people enjoy stuff in their own merits. I think it was interesting what you were saying about the director saying about half of it should be a dream sequence or a brainwashing thing, because that of course goes back to Man with the Golden Gun, doesn't it? Which the first half of it is about Bond returning from Russia and trying to kill M. And we spoke about this, didn't we, in the Skyfall episode, which is another film that borrows a lot from that. But it does. It's a lovely idea, though. It is a lovely idea, because I've just read through all of the books, and it's been something I haven't done in years. I've not read any Fleming in over 20 years, which is that's not a good thing as far as I'm concerned. And but I'd probably only read just over half of the actual books, and not in any order. I'd read them as I could find them, and this I'd went through all of them chronologically as well. So I actually read the short stories out of sequence in the lovely collection I picked up off on eBay. But reading through Man with the Golden Gun, the last one, there was a whole thing about dream sequences in there, and it's the only book that I can remember where he dreams. And there's 3 or 4 times in the book where he's woken up and things are happening around. He's talking about different people, and this was obviously written when Fleming was very ill and obviously very very going through some stuff himself. But there is almost like a dream sequence aspect about it. There's a lot of fantasy in Bond films anyway, but even the end, when he's discussing the spoiler alert, when he's discussing getting his invitation to become a knight, and he's trying to turn it down, there's almost a dream-like sequence of feeling about that. So I think that's very in keeping, actually. If the whole thing is a dream, if he wakes up as and it's all a dream, and he wakes up as someone else, yeah, why not? Fuck it, go with it. Let's do that. Let's start the next film off with it. Say, well, there you go. It was all a dream.
I was going to say, you could get your wish here that basically how they reboot it is that he wakes up in a North Korean prison cell.
That'd be amazing.
And it's Pierce Brosnan.
I mean, and it's Pierce Brosnan. Yeah, and it's Pierce. I mean, it would be great to do a James Bond film with Pierce Brosnan as James Bond. Now and start it from that prison cell, but yeah, 20 odd 30 years later.
Be The Rock.
You know what I mean? Yeah, like The Rock, basically like The Rock. Just like, and I mean that this is the opportunity that we have. Is I mean, I think that it would be mind blowing. I think that a lot of people wouldn't accept it, but we're in that world now. We're also, I know a lot of this is because people are they're just too eager to argue on the internet. Just to be clear,
no,
I don't think this is yes. Oh, Graham. Just to be clear, I'm in a bad mood with this movie, but this is a proper James Bond film, and second to Casino Royale is the best of the Daniel Craig films. This is the second best, no question about it. And it's got some proper Ian Fleming. It's got some direct Ian Fleming references in there. The strangling of Blofeld and the Poison Garden are straight from You Only Live Twice. And yeah, there's all the other callbacks as well. But it's not just the fan servicey sort of like callbacks. This is a film that is deeply entrenched and embedded in both Fleming in the Fleming universe and the cinematic James Bond universe. It is, and the Craig's interpretation of the character and the writer's interpretation of the character is, in my opinion, close to Ian Fleming's James Bond. And I will fight anyone who says different. There's no way this is not an authentic James Bond film. I think the only reason why you don't like this film is because you just don't like the fact that he kind of has this moment of, he has a family, basically. He has a kid. He becomes, more than what he is. I think that people probably just don't like that. You might take issue with the story. You might not like the story, but for me, it's a more than serviceable plot. There's plenty of intrigue. There's plenty of misdirection. You could get into something that I sometimes feel that Craig and Lea Seydoux don't have the greatest chemistry, if I'm being honest. But not to an extent that the film is rendered bad or significantly diminished in there. And I think that Rami Malek is underused in the film as well, given that it's 2 hours and 45 minutes long. I think he could have been a bit more as well. So there are things that you would want to see differently, but as a piece of work, it's absolutely magnificent. And like, if you put it up against another James Bond film, say from the 1980s, they're totally different films, and yet they're both clearly James Bond films.
Would you, if I'm going to carry on the arguing on the internet, would you be writing on Reddit or X going, hang it in the Louvre?
Well, no, I'm not going that far because I'm still quite cross with it. But it's the masterpiece of it. All the James Bond films for me is Casino Royale. That for me is the best James Bond film of all time. It's the GOAT. You can hang that one in the Louvre. It's got the best story. It's got the best characters in it. It's got the best characterization in it. It's mature. It's a proper grown-up story. And it's also definitively James Bond. There are movies that I watch more than Casino Royale, as I believe we've discussed, but because I find them more fun, but in a Rocky IV versus Rocky kind of way.
I think, From Russia with Love and on Her Majesty's Secret Service might like a word with that one.
Totally.
But,
well, you guys know my feelings on, particularly on for your eyes only, and From Russia with Love, and on Her Majesty's Secret Service. A film that I still watch, very, very regularly. But I would have to say, objectively, if I was any kind of film studies guy, if I was a film critic, and I'm not, I think it would be difficult to argue that the best of those movies is Casino Royale.
Mm-hmm. Making notes here, Terry does not think Moonraker is the best Bond film of all time.
Top 5. It's in the top 5. It's on the top 5.
I know where you're coming from in here, because there's a lot, and I obviously do my research beforehand, and I see what the internet says about it, and the internet's opinions felt very different from my opinions on this film. I have a lot of love. I don't know, but I think it's a fantastic film, and there's so much in there. But yes, I would agree that there's a lot underutilized in there. But Graham, I mean, like the problems that Terry's raised are ones I completely agree with. Lack of chemistry with Lea Seydoux. Rami Malek, who I actually thought, on subsequent watches is probably a bit better than I thought he was in subsequent watches, but hideously underwritten and underutilized, and a plot which, yes, you can pick holes in and be convoluted, but at the same point, if you're picking up those criticisms, they're the same criticisms you can make at pretty much most other Bond films. Everything else, and I would agree on Terry on this, if you don't like the fact that he's got a family, I would argue that is more about you than it is about the plotting and putting the film together as a whole.
Certainly, and if you're going to go back to You Only Live Twice, then in the book, Kissy Suzuki is pregnant when Bond leaves her. So yeah, that tails completely into that. So screw you. If you don't like that, tough. That's what happens when you have a lot of sex. Okay,
it is worth stressing this. I mean, like, we are still talking about James Bond here. I mean, like, this is a science fiction movie. It's a very, very close to, but it's effectively science fiction. I mean, the premise is very, very hokey. And yeah, I mean, the James Bond world is a world where you can drive in an ancient Aston Martin DB5 to Italy, presumably from South London, with 2 Gatling guns on board and various other countermeasures, and be absolutely fine. So, I don't think that we can. I think anybody who's got concerns about the reality of this movie as well. I mean, it is a work of fantasy, and as such, it is good. But Gary, to your point that you said it's a film that you don't necessarily love, but that you do love. Like, and I feel that could be where I am with No Time to Die. It's a film I admire hugely. But I don't know whether or not it's a film that I love in the way that I love, for example, to choose another film randomly, say Moonraker, which is a film that I do love.
Yeah, look, I would, and Graham, I'll bring you in here, but I'll just put a quick thought on my side. If I look at the films that I objectively think are brilliant and I love in a cinematic sense, they're probably not the same as the films that I would go, I love this because it's just a good film to watch. Like, I think something like Apocalypse Now, I don't watch very often, but I think is a phenomenal piece of filmmaking. Again, I'd look at something like Goodfellas, a fantastic film, one of my favorites, but equally, it's not a film that I'm going to watch an awful lot. It's not one that you can watch a lot in repeat time and time again. And yet there's a film that I've got which I really have a liking for. I don't know if which is, again, it's a well-made film. But there's a film called Seabiscuit, which I genuinely quite like and keep coming back to because it's just a well-told story. And I can watch that one again and again and again. I can watch a lot of mindless action films again and again and again. If you take the last action movie my last action movie landfall choice of The Running Man, I could happily watch that again and again and again. I've got a lot of love for that film, and I'd watch it again, but I wouldn't. Yeah, Goodfellas objectively, and don't think anybody would ever argue that Goodfellas is a worse film than The Running Man, and yet I would probably rather watch like that or okay, True Lies is a masterpiece. But there's certain films which I just think are phenomenal, but I'm not going to be watching them on a regular basis. And Graham, that's kind of how I feel about this. It is a brilliant piece of cinema. It's maybe not a piece of cinema that I'm going to be, as I said earlier, going to be turning on the TV at 10 o'clock after coming back from the pub and finding it on ITV4.
Well, maybe we should spend the next 3 hours discussing brilliance. And I think that's a worthwhile discussion. Let me go and get the scotch, and we can just carry on recording this.
Great, I'm totally up for that.
Totally up for that. It's late. I know your daughter has a football game to go and play, but by the time she comes back, we'll get on to the good stuff. It's like this is a whole thing. This is about being on about the whole thing of being on a film discussion podcast, which is so liberating. It's not like being on a football podcast at all, which is great, which is why I like it. But it is about the fact that how good, in inverted commas, a film is, it is how it affects us that is the most important thing, isn't it? You surround yourself with things that are beautiful and things that bring you joy, and the Bond films do give us joy, even if you don't know how. And if you don't love a film, even though you can appreciate how good it is, it still does. That's not going to change. It's not going to become suddenly better unless you suddenly warm to something in it, and that you see something in there that you think, actually, this I like. It's not as if this film isn't without humour. It's probably got as much humour as any other of the Craig films has, and all that. That's not a lot. And we're seeing now from the new Knives Out franchise that he's got humour in him, but it's obviously something they deliberately thought they'd pare back on. And I think this is obviously something of the alternate Bonds, maybe, where the Brosnan franchise was seen as a bit more light and frothy, whereas Dalton was a bit more hard, an antidote to more, and so it just keeps bouncing from one to the other. I don't think the next one is going to be a sort of like camp, laugh a minute stuff. Maybe it might be. Maybe the last hurrah of Eon, they might squeeze 2 films in it that'll be. Oh, I don't know who could they get in there as a camp Bond, gay Bond? Yeah, that's what they'll do. Just to really piss everyone off. But yeah, I think that the feelings that No Time to Die brings are great because they give you feelings, because it is something that you should have. I mean, like, you can't just make 25 odd films and then think, oh, right, that was a nice one and yet another triumph. No, let's finish a Bond actor's run with something really worthwhile, because God knows so many have left on something that was really was unremarkable. I think the only one who really went out in style was probably Lazenby before that.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
I'd say again, like, and it's also a rare one as well in that this was an actor who was as you say, going out on his terms as well.
Yeah.
Connery, if Connery had gone out on You Only Live Twice, I think we'd have been like, yep, that's great. He comes back for Diamonds Are Forever, where you're not entirely sure how much he wants to be there, but his paycheck is certainly dispelling any of those doubts. There's still bits in there which actually are not as where you could. It's probably, I think the criticism is a little unfair because there's bits where he's just Sean Connery, which obviously helps. But yeah, Dalton obviously didn't know that he wasn't necessarily going to be doing another film, which License to Kill is. If you've got 2 films and your 2 films are The Living Daylights and License to Kill, I think those are, you've done pretty well. Moore obviously knew that he was going out, but then, you've got that, you've got the very, very smart decision of the writers and Eon at that point in time to have Christopher Walken, Grace Jones, and then spend most of the best scenes with Roger Moore where he's just having a bit of banter with Patrick McGee, which is, an absolute delight. And, yes, it's not going to win any awards, but at least he went out and there's stuff that you can look at in A View to a Kill and go, yeah, I like that. That feels like it's even if it's Roger light, it's done in a nice enough way to send him off. Brosnan obviously goes out with an absolute honker of a film. So yeah, this is an unusual one, Terry, insofar as the actor has completely laid down the terms, which isn't necessarily something that's always happened in the franchise in the past.
And I think that's what jars with so many people is that this is as Graham's pointed out, and as we've said before, this run gets retconned somewhat again because there's some contractual issues that suddenly become available again. Some IP suddenly becomes available again, and so quickly let's do a bit of rewriting. But yeah, this was a planned arc, I guess, ending decisively, and yeah, presumably with a view to then rebooting the franchise again, which is fine, and that is not historically and traditionally what James Bond films do. They sort of have beginnings and end, and then they kind of reset. There's of course there's some continuity, but very, very little. And that also, however, there's not necessarily too much expectation of any kind of character arc and growth during the course of the film itself, or indeed, across the franchise, because that people just didn't make movies like that when they were making those earlier James Bond movies. There wasn't that kind of expectation from the audience. James Bond films were purely entertainment. People go and pay their money at the cinema. They watch a film, they enjoy it, they have a great laugh, and then they get back to their lives. It's only in recent years that we've seen an expectation from audience to have characters that are more engageable, where we have films that have story arcs, the idea of universes, of these movies making up universes and sandboxes that people or writers can then move their characters around and develop them and allow them some kind of growth. And of course, James Bond responds to that, because James Bond has to respond to that. Otherwise, those movies would just look dated. Part of me wants them to make the next James Bond film with no reboot necessarily, just like do a James Bond film. Just like, this is the guy who's playing James Bond. This is the person who's playing M. This is Moneypenny. This is it. And we're just going to tell a James Bond story. But I suspect that the broader audience would probably not be satisfied with that. And so I acknowledge that this is the development of where James Bond is. And it's like modern day Star Trek. If you don't like it, you've got a whole archive of stuff that you can retreat to. And just stay out of everyone's way, so that other people who do like it can continue like it. But never say it's not James Bond. That's criminal.
It's the more I've thought about this as we've gone on the podcast, gone through this. There's a couple of interesting bits, Graham, and I'll pick up one of them, which I think we're kind of, we've seemed to be landed firmly in that. If you look at the Craig run, certainly with a lot of what's being done, Casino Royale, the fact that they brought Sam Mendes in for a couple of films, and then you've got No Time to Die, that this feels like there's been a very conscious effort that this is Bond as cinema with a capital C, whereas a lot of other Bond has just been, movies, if you will. I think you can argue there's times where they have gone a little bit more into, we want to be taken seriously. Now, again, this isn't saying one thing is necessarily better than the other. You can have amazing movies and you can have great, beautiful, auteur-driven cinema. Occasionally, the two kind of come in together. But this is, you look back on the Craig era with maybe a couple of, Quantum of Solace probably being the main exception into here. This feels like they are trying point of going, you know what, we are Bond, but we're showing that Bond can be an art form as well as just a mindless action flick. Whereas that's obviously not always been present or very, not always, but less consistently in the past.
Yeah, I think so. But I think as well, you've got to look at how long the whole franchise has been going, 60 odd years. And the way that we consume films has changed markedly in that time. You start off where people go to the cinema and they see a film and it may get shown again at some point in the future, or it may not. That's just what happens with films. Then you get to a stage where films get shown and then they're shown on telly a few years later and you see them in colour, which when they started in 1962, that would not have happened. You'd have seen a film in black and white on the telly on a very, very small screen and not got anything out of it. Then you get to the whole stage of being on video, and then you get the whole thing of being able to own a Bond film. I remember when that happened at the end of the 80s, when you could suddenly go down to a shop and buy a Bond film. The whole concept now, it just seems so ordinary, yeah. But at the time, it was just so, I wouldn't say life changing, but it did something for me when I was in my late teens, anyway. And of course, now it goes on to even more until you get to this film, which has this great sort of, it's almost genre-defining narrative, which is picking up on gaming, on computer games, and like just trying to build that into the storytelling, which for some people really great, but for me, I find it interesting as a sort of in an academic sort of way of saying, well, this is the way that films of course they should be influenced by this sort of narrative. Why not? So yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's over such a broad period of time that, of course, it changes with time, and it does it so well. It's so flexible, and it's not because it's leading the way. It's because it's very flexible and it works. And Bond is such a good character that he has that flexibility built into him.
It's an interesting point, actually, into them. One I'd not necessarily thought about, but as you were starting to talk, it popped into my head a bit more. Obviously, you've got the, Bond, as we always talk, is the habit of what's around. But equally as well, that history of where cinema's gone from, you make an event to go to the cinema, then you've got your home entertainment, now you have streaming, now a lot of it is quite disposable. So actually, it's come back to the point that cinema, big cinema has to be an event. And if I think of some of more recent films that feel, my prime example would probably be the last two Mad Max films, Furiosa and Mad Max Fury Road. Those are films that I would argue have to be seen at the cinema to really, truly experience them. You've got Dune as well, where you can tell that Denis Villeneuve is again, he's putting this as, you need to see this at the cinema. And it feels to me, it's certainly something that I got from watching No Time to Die Again, that it's fine on my very nice TV. But as you pointed out, Graham, you've watched it in 3D and just watched bullet holes or bullet casings pop out for the first time. This, to me, feels like there's been a deliberate acknowledgement that if we are going to get people into the cinema to see a James Bond film, we have to give them something that gives them a reason to go to the cinema. Because, Terry, you've got Roger Moore films, and again, obviously this is not fair because it's a different era. You could imagine now somebody producing a Roger Moore light film that would go onto Netflix and has done particularly well and people have enjoyed and have watched, but it wouldn't necessarily demand that you go to the cinema to watch it. Whereas this film demands you go to the cinema to watch it. And if you watch it back, as we have done, even, we're talking about how much we appreciate it as an art form. Yes, there's bits and pieces that people don't like, but it's a piece of cinema. It's not something just to be watched on TV as a disposable stream.
Yeah, no, you can't you can't get Guy Ritchie to write you a nice little James Bond caper movie and stick it on Netflix. That just won't do.
It'll happen.
But perhaps there are aspects of storytelling that would actually work quite nicely in a James Bond film, and even at the core of a James Bond film. But you're right, Gary. This James Bond is and always should be a cinematic experience first. And you're right to point out, both of you, that it's transcended from being a movie to a film. And I think that these are the key the differentiator between the pre-Craig James Bond movies and the Craig James Bond films. And James Bond as art, if you like. And ultimately, it's why they didn't stream it during COVID. One, I suspect that the optics wouldn't have worked. I suspect that it is essential that it be a cinema release film, because that's how the commercial model is based, and they would have made a loss on the film, which would have been disastrous for Eon. And this is the thing that we always have to say, is Eon, while it's a safe bet, it's a huge bet to put on. It is a 1 to 1,000 shot. So it'll work, but you're putting a huge amount of yourself and a lot of money, and you're taking a huge existential risk every time they make one of these films. They're not necessarily backed up by a massive studio. Which I suspect is another reason why there's a degree of a hesitancy as to what to do next, because it's just a huge gamble. And they get bigger and bigger every time. And so yeah, this is a fantastic thing, and I wouldn't want that at all to change. Or you would, it is supposed to be a cinematic adventure. Although I do think it's interesting that there are other ways, particularly about. I mean, I watched The Gentleman quite recently, and the portrayal, I can't remember the name of the character, and it's just popped into my head, but the male lead in there, very, very, very modern portrayal of a male lead, very non-toxic, very, very fun, a nice ensemble that they built up there. And I watched that and I thought they could there's elements of this that could work in James Bond, I think, quite nicely in future iterations of the James Bond character, and which I feel is probably the future for the character as well. But again, on the broadest possible palette. But it's not just, sorry, I am rambling a bit, but so it's not just the fact that it's a big action movie and so therefore the scope is such, but they are glorious. Every scene is a picture. They're absolutely wonderful, beautiful things to watch. All the way back to Casino Royale, Quantum of Solace, despite its flaws, is gorgeous to look at.
Beautiful.
And so it's not just that these are really, really, it's the high-octane adventure that doesn't work on a small screen. It's just that the whole movie just works so much better as a piece of art on the big screen. And it's why it's important to try and get back as often as possible to watch these movies in the cinema if you can.
Yeah, we could have quite easily spent a long time repicking over the plot and the characterization and everything else. But Graham, it feels like when you're assessing No Time to Die, actually what we're assessing is less about, an individual film as a whole, but more in terms of where we are culturally and what cinema's place is, because sometimes it feels a bit unfair to label that on Bond, but at the time, when it came out, as Terry said, in post 2021 COVID, I remember the headlines. They were just like, James Bond is the one thing that could save cinema at this point in time, and so we're at a fascinating inflection point as to where Bond has started to kind of go along with the medium, not just the not just the fact of the franchise itself, but the medium that it's delivered in, which is as much of a question for for Eon to grapple with going forward. Is we could easily just release a whole heap of Bond across streaming services, but that's not the same as cinema in here. So yeah, we're at a fascinating point, and I think not just for the character, but for the medium and for where the franchise goes as a whole. Not just because of what happened in that film, but because of the macro environment that we're in at the moment.
Well, that's why it makes it so difficult to know where the franchise goes next, because it isn't an easy choice. And you say that No Time to Die was going to be the one to save cinema, but they've been saying that about Bond for decades, literally decades. Bond dug MGM out of so many holes over the years, until it finally couldn't dig it out any longer, and MGM went bust. And that's why, obviously, we didn't have any Bond films for a few years. And that's why they rushed out Bond films as well. Because MGM needed a few million quid, and so they had to suddenly come up with a new one. So yeah, it knows its place. It's been doing this for a long time, but I don't think that the creative force behind it has got the energy there anymore. We said this in the last time we recorded. Technically, they've only got the franchise for another 10 years. How many Bond films can you get out in that time? And, yeah, 2.
I was going to say, at this rate, 2.
2, yeah.
If they started now.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, we did say at the time, we were talking about whether or not it would go to streaming services, and, do what Star Wars has done. That doesn't seem to have happened, even though Amazon did buy it. They bought out MGM for their back catalogue, but even there, we're not seeing Bond films constantly available for Prime subscribers. They're just not there. They are doing what they always do and coming off and on streaming platforms seemingly at a whim. Yeah, it would be great to see other creative people take Bond, do things. As I said, when I was reading through the novels, I thought to myself, how would I go about doing this now? And of course, I came up with amazing ideas, and of course, I thought this is a 5-season run on Netflix. And it would be brilliant. It would be the mojo. But of course, that's just me coming up with ideas, and there are actually people with talent who are out there who would come up with amazing ideas as well. And maybe that's something we can look forward to in the future. But I don't think that Eon have killed off Bond. I did when I watched it last night on Thursday night, and I saw James Bond Will Return. For the first time, it did strike me as saying, well, James Bond will return for someone, just not us.
Mm.
It'll return somehow, because you can't not do this idea. It's like someone put in the end, Sherlock Holmes will return. Of course he will. It's just a great character that someone's going to make a film of sooner or later.
Because how far is it? When you say 10 years, Graham, are you referring to the fact that the character sort of like the novels go into the public domain? Is that what you mean? Or what is it that you mean?
Yeah, Fleming died in 1964. So this August, it will be the 60th anniversary of his death. So, and when it gets to 70 years, all of his books go into the public domain. So you will be able to go back to the original source material, and you'll be able to write films, and distribute films that use the James Bond characters and use all the characters that were in the books. And no one will be able to sue you, or no one will say we own this property. Considering the legal shenanigans that Eon have had over the last 50 years, I cannot believe that they want to pursue anything like what Disney have done in the past with IP, when they've tried to extend these things over years. It can be done, and it has been done, but even Disney have lost the earliest Mickey Mouse stuff now. So I can't see them doing that. Which leaves it open. Which leaves it open for anyone to do. Technically, in Canada, you already can, because over there the statute is 50 years. So you already can make Bond films. You can't distribute them anywhere other than Canada, but you can do it. So there, all this stuff has got to be in there. Michael G. Wilson, last time I saw him at the premiere, he didn't look like someone who was willing to go in and do a lot of work on setting up a new franchise. I
think that is the thing that, and I suppose that also explains why they've not sold up, because if you've only got technically 10 years of exclusivity, if you like, of the character, then that isn't not necessarily going to, given how much it would cost you to buy James Bond films, to make them. You've got 10 years. And all right, if you're quick about it, in this day and age, you might be able to churn one out every 3, but more likely it will be every 5.
Well,
so that'll be that, really.
Yeah, that's why I thought Disney, because Disney have been buying these sort of franchises, and they can turn it out quickly. And also they've got the lawyers to try and extend the whole thing as well. But like what they've been doing with Star Wars. But even then, I think for us, we view the franchise quite warmly and think, well, yeah, that sounds like a no-brainer. But for them, the Bond franchise is not the Star Wars franchise. It's nowhere near like that. So, or the Marvel.
Yeah, why go to all the trouble? Yeah. So, why go to all that trouble when there are more bankable franchises that you already own? Or others that you could acquire. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
It's a fascinating inflection point that we're at. My takeout from that is that the three of us should decamp to Canada and write the film of Pierce Brosnan waking up in a North Korean cell, and nobody would be able to stop us at all, apart from the rest of the world. But Canada would be fine with this. Absolutely fine.
And Pierce would be totally up for that as well.
Oh, totally.
And everybody, they all make those movies up in Vancouver now. These films up in Vancouver now, don't they? Because of the tax break. So they've got the facilities to do it. It's I'm
sure. I'm sure Vancouver Island would pass for North Korea as well.
I think you're probably right.
Yeah.
I mean, I've not been to either, but I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it. No one's been to either.
Yeah, I mean, having Bonds go. I mean, look, we're then close to we're close to Alaska. I'm sure James Bond with anything snow related is always going to be a winner for us. So yeah, look, I mean, I think that there's nothing bad about this plan whatsoever at all. This is exactly where we're going to go.
That's it. Pierce Brosnan is actually saved by Willy Bogner, and that's wow. This is we've already got the makings of a classic.
Yes.
I feel kind of sad now. I was cross at the beginning, and now I feel sad because I'm now thinking that this actually could be the last James Bond film, that they might not actually bother to do another one because they've taken so long and we don't appear to be anywhere and they're running out of time. Am I overreacting?
Well, I don't know. I wonder. I wonder if now we've gone through all the films, we are a bit of an end of the road ourselves here.
Ourselves, yeah, we're hitting a crossroads.
Yeah. I wonder if the next episode, after of course our next action movie Landfill episode, which is on Heat. It's not on Heat.
It will be
like some amorous dog or something. No, it's
it will be, but if that's what you want it to be, then I can make that happen. I'm not that old.
Yes, you are. But what maybe our next Bond one should be just titled Bond 26, and us coming up with harebrained ideas of what it's going to be, or just discussing some mythical film that we will pretend that we've seen, and not discuss it at all, but just to add elements to it that it will have in there, and all the bits we loved and all the.
One topic that has been on the shelf for years. For a Bod Job Pod is thinking about an extended universe and what it would look like.
Yeah,
we have had that discussion about looking at the other characters.
Yeah,
I mean, really just that chance to chat to some of the other characters. So that's something that we could certainly do for our next podcast. But am I right does not answer the question. Am I overreacting? Will James Bond return in another James Bond film produced by Eon?
No. Maybe not produced by Eon, but I think he's going to be, as we've said, he's far too valuable for box office and IP, not for some, even if he kind of peters out with Eon, he's too valuable for somebody not to have a go at going, we're going to do this.
Graham, you said no as well.
Yeah, I said no. There is talk. I think Greg Wilson is Michael G. Wilson's son, and I think there is sort of an idea that he's going to be the one to take the franchise on. But I think with only 10 years of sole access to the IP, of course they've got all the Bond film IP, so stuff like Q and things like all the ideas that they've introduced. They've got all of that, so all the very, very familiar stuff. That sort of stuff that is important. So that does give the whole Eon package something there. It's whether or not that's enough to take it through onto the next raft. I personally don't think it will do, but yeah, who knows?
I was going to say, if we're going to, I'll try and land on a happier note because we are, it's a somber film, and obviously we're ending in a somber area, and to maybe try and bring Terry out of the stage of grief at the moment, which he appears to be in. I've got a suggestion for you just to finish off. If we are going to have a spin-off, let's have a Paloma spin-off.
Yes.
Yeah. Does that make you a happier man, thinking of Ana de Armas kicking ass all over Latin and Central America?
It really does. I mean, that scene is just so wonderful. It's one of the best action scenes. And again, when we talk about chemistry, I mean, obviously they've had that experience together with Knives Out, which is an immaculate film. And it was just such a lovely vignette in that film. It's to be treasured, absolutely treasured, that sequence, and just brings so much. It's a moment of absolute joy in this fantastic film. but I have now moved from anger to grief. I don't know whether or not that's in the right order of stages, but that's where I've gone.
Acceptance.
I'm now grieving.
You're in acceptance,
Right.
I think. Yeah.
I think so. I'm not quite at acceptance.
Okay.
Does grief come before acceptance?
I don't know. It's all part of grief, Terry.
It's all part of grief.
It's all part of it. Yeah.
It is. I suppose it is.
Yeah.
I should go and reflect on that then for a while.
Yes, it's look for. I can, at the end of the day, if we bring this, we've gone quite deep into it, and yeah, there's so much as well that we can celebrate, and if this is where I always come back to. If I want to take, I have a similar kind of thing. I can't come out of No Time to Die feeling a little bit. If I want to make myself feel happy again, I just think of the Cuban sequence and really go, that's almost one of the high points of the franchise in general. If you were going to put a James Bond sequence into a nutshell, you've got ridiculous bionic eye messaging. You've got MacGuffin, which is killing off bad people. You've got Ana de Armas and Daniel Craig shooting people, rival secret agents. I mean, you could pack that. Now, if you're going to say hang it in the Louvre, that can be hanging in the Louvre.
Yeah.
As an example of pure action brilliance.
Taking a break to have a shot of vodka as well halfway through. I mean, it was just poetry. Absolute action movie poetry.
And as well, it's got plot holes in it as well, because he's constantly going on about getting that car, get that car, get that car. And when she does get that car and she totals it, then, suddenly they don't need a car. So, but it doesn't matter, they just walk away. It's great. They don't need a car, actually, after all.
But again, as you say, Graham, if you're bothered by plot holes, then you really are watching the wrong movies.
Yes. I'm glad I could lift the mood at the end, and it's what I'm here for, to provide levity in moments of.
You're the Phoebe Waller-Bridger of the Odd Job Pod.
I am the Phoebe Waller-Bridger of the Odd Job Pod. I'll also say as well that if there is one motif that keeps coming through, I love it in this film that the bionic eye provides more of the entertainment than most things, especially with Cyclops just having his, killed by an electromagnetic watch that blows up your bionic eye. Amazing.
Use your watch, Bond.
That's the shit that I live for. But anyway, I think we've come to we've not just come to the end of the podcast, we've come to the end of our run on Bond. Now, if this is one of your first experiences of the Odd Job podcast, you've got a whole back catalogue to go into at the same time as we've been going through them. So you can delve back in like we do. We go into the shelf, we pick off a Bond film, we watch it. We've obviously done it through a bit more kind of order, but you can go back, you can listen to any of them, enjoy. Let us know this is here to be treasured. Maybe don't do what we did and sit through and do a commentary on The World Is Not Enough, because you might regret your life choices after that bit.
I am still really sorry about that.
Yeah, there's sore points for all of us. Mine has been my Moonraker journey, and I'm not entirely sure Graham and I have ever entirely forgiven Terry for going, The World's Not Enough's not a bad one to do a director's commentary on. It's probably a bit of a hidden gem because nobody talks about it that much.
And it was garbage.
It really was. But yeah, as you heard, there's plenty more that we can come. There's so much that I think that's rich in the Bond universe. We haven't touched on the books. There's plenty of places we could go looking at minor characters. So the Odd Job podcast will absolutely be back. You can depend on that. Probably more reliable and quicker than Eon as well with the next Bond film as well. In the meantime, we have to look forward the next action movie, Landfill, which is the kind of semi-spin-off of the Odd Job Pod, which is Graham's choice of Heat, which the aforementioned Heat, which we will all be on as we go into the next podcast. So yes, if the thought of three middle-aged men on Heat appeals to you, then please tune in for our next podcast. Until then, it's goodbye from me, Gary Andrews. Thank you very much, Graham.
Thank you, Gary.
And thank you, Terry.
Thank you, Gary.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye, Mr. Bond.